The Last Word with Matt Cooper on Today FM.
It's 5 years since Whitney Houston died at the sad early age of 48. This weekend, the world premiere of a major documentary about her life and career, Can I Be Me? It's been made by Nick Broomfield, who has made many acclaimed documentaries on the likes of Aileen Wuornos, Kurt Cobain and others. Nick, thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
Oh, it's a pleasure, and it's something I feel very passionate about, so I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, why did you decide to do a documentary on Whitney Houston? What was your interest in the subject?
Well, she's such an iconic figure who brought such happiness to so many people, and I think touched so many people so deeply, and yet I feel was very harshly criticized towards the end of her life, and it just seemed a good time to look at her and celebrate her and look at her life again.
Harshly criticised by who and why?
I think she was judged very harshly for her drug addiction. She was ridiculed on the late night sort of talk shows, the Jay Leno's and Letterman's. And I think she was a very sensitive soul. And I think she was treated very badly towards the end of her life.
How long did she suffer with drug addiction?
I think it was something that started very young when she grew up in a very tough area in Newark, New Jersey. I think there was a lot of drugs around when she was growing up. So I think, what probably started, as with so many people, as a recreational thing, developed as she became more famous and the pressures mounted on her.
Was this all before she became involved with Bobby Brown, her husband,
yes,
who I think many people blame for her sad demise?
Yeah, no, this was a long time before that. Both her brothers have suffered with drug problems on and off, with addiction problems from a very early age too. So I think she is much more likely that she was introduced to the drugs by her brothers, in fact.
But Bobby Brown didn't help much either, though, did he?
I think what is amazing in the film is this incredible unseen footage of Bobby Brown and Whitney Houston together. You see them acting out Ike and Tina Turner together, having an amazing amount of fun. And they're like two teenagers together. You completely get their relationship. And there's incredible performance footage of them together. And you just get their dynamic. I think they loved each other. And they just went to excesses together, and they weren't able to support each other off drugs. I think they had to split up to get off drugs.
You mentioned that you have footage. Where did you get this footage? Because if you're making a documentary about somebody who has died, yes, you can interview various people in retrospect, but that footage, how did you persuade people to give it to you?
Well, it was actually my co-director, Rudy Dolitzel, who shot this footage and had complete access to Whitney Houston for many, many months. Backstage, candid interviews, her with Bobby Brown, Whitney with Robin Crawford, this amazing woman who was her companion for many years too. And it's so intimately shot by Rudy. When I saw it, I just couldn't believe it. There was 100 hours of footage that we went through. And it's something that really, really makes this film something special because the footage has never been seen before.
Tell us a bit more about this woman, Robin Crawford, and why she was so important to Whitney Houston's life.
Whitney met Robin when she was probably 16. So she's from the same neighborhood in Newark, New Jersey. And Robin was slightly older than her. She sort of protected Whitney a lot when Whitney was sort of at school. I think Whitney was picked on quite a lot, from what I gather. And when Whitney started her career, it was Robin who was the go-to person. It was Robin who everybody had to go through to get to Whitney. And she was sort of like Whitney's protector and also the person who kept Whitney kind of on track, appearing, on time for interviews and that kind of thing. They had a very intimate relationship, a very supportive, intimate relationship, a relationship that became very sort of criticized by the media and by people like her mother.
Why? In what way?
Well, Whitney was sort of, instead of people being accepting of the relationship, there were a lot of are you gay kind of things, but in a sort of almost persecuting kind of way. I think her mother very much disapproved of the relationship. The record company disapproved of the relationship. And it was those kinds of pressures, I think, that actually were Whitney's undoing. I think she could never be herself, which is, she apparently her favorite phrase was, "Can I be me?"
And hence the title of your documentary. Why did she use that phrase? In what circumstances?
Well, apparently she used it when she went into the recording studio because she wanted to get back more to her R&B gospel roots, and she would go into recording sessions saying, "Can I be me?" And they sampled it. The musicians sampled it, so they would, "Can I be me?" They would play it as she came in because she used it so much. But it was sort of a metaphor for the rest of her life.
In addition, though, wasn't there a case that a lot of people, particularly from her own community, sort of shunned her on the basis they felt that she had crossed over for a white audience, that she sort of had almost sold out on her musical heritage and her own musical beliefs to sing for a white audience to make as much money as possible?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you have to remember, before Beyonce's and all the rest of it, it was Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston was the person who made the Beyonce's possible. She was the first, massive crossover artist. And she was marketed incredibly carefully by, Clive Davis and Arista Records. In those days, there was a black division and a white division. And anything that sounded too black was re-recorded. And so as to make her acceptable for a wide audience. But in the so doing, in marketing Whitney in this way, they also alienated her sort of own people. And at the Soul Train Awards in 1988 and 1989, she was booed by a predominantly black audience who called her Whitey Houston or Oreo cookie, things like that were incredibly devastating to Whitney, who was still like super young and had no idea where this was coming from.
I suppose that movie, The Bodyguard, with Kevin Costner, didn't exactly help her in that regard either, did it, with the black audience?
I don't think it was. Actually, in a way, that film was heralded for the first interracial kiss. You remember that kiss between, this gives you an idea of how backward America is. The kiss between Kevin Costner and Whitney Houston was the first interracial kiss in American cinema.
Good Lord.
So that's just how backward it is there.
And of course, speaking of bodyguards, wasn't there a man called David Roberts as well, who I suppose spilled the beans on a lot of what was going on in her life, particularly people taking advantage of her financially and doing so much drugs while on tour with her?
Yeah, David Roberts was this amazing bodyguard who had worked in the Royal Scotland Yard Protection Unit in Britain before he was the bodyguard. And he, I think, was very protective towards Whitney. I think he loved her deeply. And when he saw what was going on, that there were people in her entourage who were supplying her with drugs, he wrote a very detailed report, which he sent to the family members who were running the Whitney Houston sort of enterprise, indicating these people should be terminated. They should be taken off her staff. And instead of doing that, he was fired from his job. So, but it's amazing to actually meet him. He's a very funny man. You can see how dedicated he is to Whitney. And in many ways, he was the inspiration for the bodyguard in The Bodyguard.
It sounds to me, Nick, like you're a big fan of Whitney Houston. Did you go into this project as a big fan of her music and actually get to like her more as you did the work?
Actually, I knew very little about Whitney Houston. And in the course of making the film, I really me and the editor, Mark Hoffman, who knew very little about Whitney also, really kind of fell in love with her, because what you see in this footage is somebody who's fun-loving and has amazing sort of comedic timing. The performances that you see on stage are so passionate. And in '99, which is where a lot of the footage comes from, you can see it's not so easy for her to hit some of those notes, but she goes for each one, and you can sometimes sense the pain that she's going through just to really hit it. And she's sort of is this magnificent person on stage. She's like sweating and pushing herself, and I just had such respect for her. I felt this was an artist who was giving her absolutely everything to every performance that she did. And you really feel it in the footage. And I was very, very moved in making the film.
And yet, 99 was her last major tour, wasn't it? She sort of semi-retired a few years later. And she had a difficult last decade, didn't she, before she died in 2012, aged just 48.
Yeah. I mean, I think there were a lot of pressures on her. And remember too, it's also very different, I think, being a black artist from a very poor area like Newark than it is for being, like a member of the Rolling Stones, for example. She had an entourage of probably 50, 60 people who were dependent on her, and she was their meal ticket out of Newark. She provided a life for them that they wouldn't have had. And it wasn't just her family and their families. It was also Bobby Brown's family and a lot of other hangers-on. And, her fortune of $250 million basically went into supporting these people. She was a sort of immensely generous person. And I think the one person who was never really allowed the privacy and the right to lead her life the way she wanted to was her. She couldn't just retire, which is, I think, what she wanted to do, and not perform. In 2009, when she went back on the road, it wasn't because she wanted to, but there were all these pressures from her family and those kinds of people for her to go and make some more money and take them all on tour again, because they loved the experience. But it was not a tour that she wanted to do, or a tour that she was capable of doing, because her vocal cords were no longer the ones that she'd had when she was younger.
How sad for her. Best of luck with the documentary. It gets its world premiere this weekend. It's Can I Be Me? The story of Whitney Houston. Nick Broomfield, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on The Last Word this evening.
A pleasure.
The Last Word with Matt Cooper on Today FM.